Hello and welcome to this Pixel Maven project tutorial. This time we'll be making two cards from one, creating a really cool watercolor background and then doing some die cutting to create these two cards. So we will start by creating the background, that way it has some time to dry. You can use any stencil, and today I will be using the Elegant Swirls stencil, which is this one. In the sample, I use the Flowing Drops stencil from Altenew. And really any stencil will work. Of course, they're all going to give you a different look. And every time you do this technique, it's going to look different anyway. So what I have here is just my Wendy Vecchi Make Art Station. And that's just so that I can pick this up and move it out of the way. I have a piece of craft mat here. And then I have my Altenew palette that I'm just going to put my stencil on to get started. So this is a piece of 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, and this is by Strathmore. And we're going to just start this off by, I'm going to put just a little bit of water on here so that it can absorb that while we're working on getting the inks on here. So this time we're going to use some ink cubes. And if you've been following any of my recent projects, you know these are all coming from my Altenew Level 3 Educator Series Final. And what I'm going to do is just take these ink cubes and just start inking right on the stencil. And it's important to get a lot on here if you want to have a saturated look. The less you put on, the less is going to transfer to your watercolor paper, and you'll end up with a much lighter look. Of course, it's all up to you. I'm putting on a lot of yellow, I should say, because the yellow is going to mix really nicely with the pink shades and turn into some really cool oranges. So this one here is Citrus Burst, and Warm Sunshine is up in the corner here. I'm going to do some Rubelite just in the one corner. And again, really getting a lot on here. If your ink pads are dry, you'll want to re-ink them. And of course, I've used some re-inkers in other projects for this series, and of course I have them. So I added a lot of ink to my ink pads, and they'll turn out great this way. So this last color here is Cotton Candy, and the cotton candy is what really mixes with the yellow great to make a fantastic orange. So I'm just pulling it through the center. And yeah, I know I got some yellow on my ink pad, but I'm not really concerned about it. So now that I have that, I'm going to move my samples out of the way because I don't want to get them wet. All right, so I've got water on my piece of watercolor paper. Boy, I can talk. And now I've got all of this ink on my stencils. So I'm going to put some water on here to really activate it, and then swirl it around to get the colors to move. You don't want to put too much water on here, because then when you put it on here, it again will be, the colors will be really light. So again, the more water you put on here, the less saturated the colors are going to look. So now that I have a good amount of water and I have some movement, I'm just going to pick this up really, really carefully. And I don't care that it's dripping. Flip it over and get it on my cardstock and press it down. Now, I don't care that I'm going to get ink in the white spots. That's okay. What's more important is to get this smushed down and get that ink transferred to the watercolor paper. Now, it may not look great when you first pull it up, and you might be like, wah, wah. Give it some time to dry, and you're probably going to fall in love with it. Okay, so you can even take a cloth and wipe it all off, so that way when you pick it up, you end up with something way cool like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and let this whole thing dry, set it to the side, and we'll come back and work on the rest of the project while we're waiting for this to dry. All right, so while the watercolor panel is drying, we're going to go ahead and work on the background for this card. And we just have a big swath of yellow that's blended in with Warm Sunshine, and then we're going to do some ink spatter. So that's super easy to do. Of course, because this is nice and juicy, sometimes I like to just bring a Post-it into play and make sure that I'm not going to get too much, especially if most of it's going to be exposed. You want to make sure that you dab off a little bit. And as I'm looking at my sample here, I just want to make sure that it extends up far enough into the L here and then down into the H, so I've got pretty good coverage behind. If you can, try to avoid the edges. That way you don't get any ink coverage on the edge. It'll grab it and it ends up a little bit dark, which we really kind of want to avoid. And that should be pretty good. It's kind of like an X, not quite. All right, and then while we've got this out here, we're going to take some Tim Holtz Distress Spray Stain in Black Soot. I'm going to just shake this up a little bit. I'm just going to do some, open it up and do some spatter. Again, it's great to do it on the Wendy Vecchi station because it's not going to go all over the place, and now I can just move this out of the way. All right, so we're still working on this card here, and let's go ahead and get the sentiment stamped here. I'm using my stamp positioning tool, and I have my stamp set up here. This is from the Altenew sentiment strip stamp set, and I have it set up so that way I can just use my Sizzix sticky pieces here and just line up a 1/4 inch piece of cardstock, and this is Warm Sunshine by Altenew. And I'm just going to ink up my sentiment, and it's going to land right on top of that strip. And that's like perfection. There. So now I've got my strip. And I'll go ahead and grab my watercolor piece, and we can start looking at some assembly. All right, so looking at both of our samples, this piece here is cut out with the Mega Hello die from Altenew. And save all your pieces so you can put the little spots back in place. And then it's cut out with the large stitch rectangle from Lawn Fawn. So we can actually we can't. I was kind of hoping, this is design on the fly, that maybe we could fit both in at the same time. But see how that's just not going to work. So we will go ahead and do our die cutting first, and then our rectangle first, and then go ahead and cut out the hello. So it's kind of important to make sure everything stays in place. That way, because the way that these stencils are, it's only 6 inches, so you just need to make sure that you're going to get full coverage. Of course, you can shift it left, right, up, and down, whatever makes the best look for you, and I think that looks great. So I'm going to pop this through my die cutting machine, and then I'm going to come back and do the hello, and then we'll talk about assembly. All right, before I take the die off of here, I just want to show you that the hello fits on here pretty perfectly right inside of the stitch lines. So make sure you're adding it in pretty precisely, and then some Post-it tape really helps make sure everything stays in place. And when I run it through upside down like so, and a couple of times just to make sure that the die cut pieces really pop out. This particular one has this huge metal piece, so sometimes I have to pop out these little extra pieces with a little pokey tool. All right, so that's good. And I can gently pull out all these guys. Now, you can do the trick where you add the self-adhesive sheet on the back, so that way it's easier to put down later. But after it's run through the Big Shot, see how it ended up pretty nice and flat. I find that it's easier to lay down this way than to try to struggle with the sticky sheet with all these pieces. So word to the wise, and especially this one, when you're putting it onto your other card, it can get really wonky really quick. So sometimes it's better to have some liquid glue under there so that way you can move it around a little bit if you need to. All right, so this we're going to set aside I'll set it aside with our sample card here. And we're going to finish working on this one because this guy's almost done. So I have my little pieces, I think. I'm missing this part of the O. It's hiding somewhere. If I don't find it now, I'll find it later when I put the whole card together. But let's get a sentiment put on here. And this time I can't use my little trick. But I will use my Sizzix sheets to hold everything down. And I'm going to get my sentiment in here. And it just says, let's chat soon. Of course, this sentiment stamp set from Altenew has all sorts of great little ideas for card making. Okay, so pop that on there. I'm falling apart, guys. Okay, get some ink. My favorite VersaFine Claire. Pop that on. Perfect. So with the 140-pound cold press, sometimes it's a little textury, so you might have to add more ink and try that again just to make sure that it gets on there really well. Let me get a card base because I didn't get one of those out yet either. I am really prepared. Fortunately, I always have card bases scored and ready to go, but I can't find my bone folder. But it's scored, so it'll come together easy. There we go. Now I can pop this guy on. All right, that's going to be really, really cool. And I seriously don't know where that other piece went. I bet you it's still sitting on the platform. So we'll see if I find it in a minute here. Trying to avoid the stitched areas around the edges because that's a place where glue likes to come through. But otherwise, I'm getting glue up into these little corners here to make sure that they lay down nice and flat. Okay, and then we'll make sure that we get all the way up in the corner here. Align it down one edge. And then all the way up in the corner over here and bring it down. Excellent. You could leave it just like that if you wanted to, or you can pop these guys in. Just make sure you try to remember to put the right one in the right place. And I'm going to bring this in as a sample so you can see like there's a little thin line here. Actually, what you could do if you wanted to is take this piece here, since it is just cut out. And I don't know why it doesn't want to go in place, but it doesn't. Probably because something's a little out of place, but that's all right. This will work well enough. I just need to have the H. So I can put this guy back in. And then, yeah, that's what happened. This kind of curved a little funky, I think. Yep, and I don't know if I'll be able to fix that because it's really stuck down. That's staying exactly where it is. See how this got a little wonky there? That's all right. But let's get the big L piece in place. And I can get the little O piece. Sometimes tweezers help. And this little E, just going to pull them out for that. Get him to kind of match up. That is good. And I am missing that leather piece. I really, really, oh, there it is. Like I said, it was sitting on my die cutting machine. And there you go. So there's one card. gorgeous, ton of fun, and look completely different than the sample, but also very cool and in the same spirit. And let's finish our other card. All right, and of course this is dry. Pop this guy on. And with this one, the trick is to just get a little tiny bit of glue on the little pieces, these little thin connectors. Really don't want a lot on there. Don't want it to smush out. Of course, if you have an adhesive eraser, that will take care of it. Just make sure that if you're using Tombow that it's dry before you do that. Okay, and then here's the hard part. I don't want him to hang off. But that's pretty good. And you could leave it just like this, but don't forget we made a sentiment. So you could do what I'm doing here and cut all these little words out and arrange them. Or you can just adhere it however you want. Now the way that I did this is I'm just going to take this and a little pencil line. And then we're going to go ahead and adhere them. And I'm going to use some tweezers because it just makes more sense for me. Now here's the secret. I'm going to put the first one down, and then I'm going to put the last one down. Okay. And then we know we've got of and are and all and kinds. And they're going to fit in there spaced pretty evenly. You could even do it just like that. Actually, I think I'm going to. On the sample, I went straight down. Have you noticed I can't really talk and do this all at the same time? It does take a hair of concentration. Otherwise, I will put this in the wrong order and it will say you all are kinds of wonderful, or you have all are kinds of, you know, it's just going to be all messed up. There. Perfect. So now you can see, of course, we'll go ahead and erase that line, right? So 2 cards out of one really cool background piece. And you've got some things to send to your friends. I hope you enjoyed this Pixel Maven project tutorial and that it inspires you to create something fun and colorful today. I hope to see you again at another project tutorial soon, but until next time, happy crafting.